growing up in Hoy, on the island of Hoy, which is really, you're talking about a lot of beach, you know, around an island. Everything that people got from there that they didn't have to pay for probably came out of the beach. Their food came out of the beach. The timbers that they put in the roofs of their houses came out of the beach. And for somebody like me, the comics as well would wash ashore from the battleships in the Scapa Flow, you see. Freebie in the outside, I think I referred to it once. And they were always missing their covers. You never tell what the name of the comic was. And usually you couldn't tell what the end of the story was. So again, I would probably have to sit there and sort of draw out my own finish to it.
Jim Baikie is a leading comic strip artist living and working in his native Orkney, drawing inspiration from the environment which surrounds him. His fascination with comics has stayed with him since childhood.
The business of pictures and words together is so powerful to me, you know. And there was a time when I felt it was fading out, you know, not fading out in me, but fading out as a universally accepted means of communication. And I think that what's happened today is that the big cycle has come round, and suddenly people are interested in having the comic strip again as a means of communication.
More and more comics are coming out with actual kind of serious statements, and I think it's been taken seriously.
The interesting thing about it is where literature crosses cinema, you get the both. You get like the dynamism of cinema, and then you get a good read at the same thing.
A lot of writers have started writing good stories as comics.
Open the doors, please.
Most people perceive comics simply as entertainment for children, which has always been a source of great frustration for many of the writers and artists.
Electro, Watchmen, Shadow, you name it, they're all in there. 50p job each.
In the past, mainstream comics have failed to deal with adult subjects, but this is changing, a revolution being led by the writers and artists themselves.
420, please.
More mature themes have brought more mature readers. Comics, in every sense, are growing up.
Oh, you better sign it, didn't you?
There you
How
go.
long have you been drawing comics?
15 years.
15 years.
Twice as long as you've been alive.
Yeah.
All of those sort of fantasies that people used to have about what I would do if I was doing comics, now those people are doing them. And they're getting to stretch, and the market is such that they can stretch, and they are being encouraged to do things that perhaps as little as 15 years ago they wouldn't have been.
Writer and illustrator John Byrne has used the maturing of comics as an opportunity to update that classic hero, Superman.
In the 2.5 years I was working on Superman, basically I took everything that was there and just put a slight spin on it. The idea was to say the modern audience wants certain other things from the characters. They don't want their characters quite so perfect, quite so squeaky clean.
But it was another comic book hero, Batman, guardian of law and order in Gotham City, who was to make the revolutionary breakthrough. In the spring of 1986, comic fans were thrilled and amazed by the publication of Frank Miller's Batman, The Dark Knight Returns, a 200-page epic that elevated the comic into a graphic novel.
Batman isn't a silly character anymore. Like, he's dark and broody and dangerous.
It was not just the scale of the piece that was so innovative and challenging. Miller had taken Bruce Wayne, alias Batman, and completely redefined the character by allowing him to age. What emerged was a man nearly 50 years old, cynical and bitter, who chose to impose his own brand of justice on what he saw to be a corrupt and decadent society. The response from the fans was immediate. They loved it. Miller had paved the way for experimentation in mainstream comics.
It's just built up over the years with the advent of more adult comics has brought it into the fore, where people that were buying them when they were kids are coming back into it now. They're seeing them, and the more adult stuff like Frank Miller's Dark Knight, Elektra, Alan Moore's Watchmen and Swamp Thing.
Less than a year after the release of Batman, The Dark Knight Returns, came another pioneering work, Watchmen, by writer Alan Moore and artist Dave Gibbons. Once again, the superhero convention was turned on its head. In Watchmen, set in America in 1985, superheroes have been outlawed.
We deliberately set out to do a piece that was as complex, as sophisticated, and as multi-layered as the best contemporary mainstream fiction. That's not saying that it's necessarily any good, but it sure as hell is complicated.
Watchmen chronicles the fall of the superheroes as, one after another, they are mysteriously killed. In parallel action, flashback and flash forward, the reader is presented with a web of visual devices and counterpoints, including a second comic story within Watchmen.
Well, the artwork that I did on Watchmen was done in a specific way for a specific purpose, because Watchmen was a very, very involved story, calling for lots of detail, lots of specific events shown in a very specific way. So therefore I adopted a very clear way of breaking the page down so that the reader didn't have to battle both with a complex layout and a complex picture structure as well. And for that reason I divided the pages into a 3x3 grid, which I think also has the effect of a proscenium arch in a theatre. It stays the same size and you don't notice it, and I think it also pulls you into the picture and into the story more.
Since Watchmen, Moore has been acknowledged as one of the finest writers working in comics today.
You start off doing a book like Watchmen, for example, aiming it at a 15-year-old comic fan. Halfway through the run, you suddenly find that it's getting literary reviews in prestigious literary magazines, and you find yourself in the main highways and byways of mainstream fiction, dressed with your underwear over your trousers and wearing a red cape. It can be quite a disorienting experience, as well as quite an embarrassing one. I think that now we've got the public excited, we've obviously got a duty to keep them excited, to keep pushing the medium forward.
In his writing, Moore is keen to take comics out of the realm of fantasy and into the stark reality of today's world. In his first American commission for the Vigilante series, Moore wrote a story which dealt with the sexual abuse of children. Focusing on a convicted father's release from prison, the story highlights the complexity and frailty of human relationships. In the final chase, where the father is killed, the reader and all the participants are forced to look again at some of their attitudes. The illustrator for Moore's editions of The Vigilante was Jim Baikie. He's always been frustrated that stories confronting such moral issues were rare, not only for him as an artist, but also for the readers.
I think that the audiences for comics have always been deprived at a certain age. If you speak to any Dan Dare fan, you know, who read The Eagle, and I was one of the abiding frustrations is that suddenly it wasn't addressing the level of maturity that we'd reached. You know, suddenly we had girlfriends and so on, and Dan Dare still wasn't getting organised with Miss Peabody, and we couldn't understand what the heck was going on, you know. And I think what's happened, and, you know, there's a comic called 2000 AD, which has, in a sense, addressed this a little bit. And they've got feedback from their readers to say we want more and meatier material. And as a result of that, the people who published 2000 AD have brought out this magazine called Crisis, which is just going straight for the jugular.
Crisis has brought overtly political themes into British mainstream comics. The first story, Third World War, created by Pat Mills and Carlos Esquerra, tells of 5 young people who are drafted to work for a multinational corporation which is exploiting people and politics in a Central American community. The second story, The New Statesman, illustrated by Jim Baikie and written by John Smith, is set in the year 2048. England has become the 51st state of America, and we're in the middle of the presidential election.
That aren't usually interested in comics, that don't want the run-of-the-mill fights, people being knocked through walls, who are looking for something with more meat, you know, something. I'm not saying that it's serious literature or anything, just addresses serious contemporary issues which touch upon everyone's life.
Crisis is a new concept which has really interested me. It's interested an enormous number of people. And while I was touring Britain with the crew, the Crisis crew as we call ourselves, or called ourselves at that time, we just couldn't believe the number of people in the target age group who were asking the specific, hard, seeking questions that we have sought to address by producing this magazine.
I think that what comics can do, because it is an inherently sensational form, is to take these issues which may be dry, may be boring to some, and by combining words and pictures can come up with a form of narrative that will get over quite complex issues of morality, of politics, of whatever, in a form that the reader can understand.
I enjoy comics. I don't enjoy reading the Independent, the Guardian or newspapers, you know, to see, like, the view in the world. It's my way, and everybody has their own way of feeding themselves information, television, radio, whatever. That's my way. So it's getting through to people. If they just want entertainment from comics or what, it'll get through. And I think that's why Crisis is important, because it makes a good stand and shows really good ideas and concepts of, like, political world. So it's important, and it's good, and it's entertaining.
I think I've got a fantastic position of power. I can actually change the world with this comic, whereas before I was just entertaining people. This time we are actually engineering social change with this comic. It's a very new thing for me. I didn't realise I would enjoy it so much.
I was involved recently in a comic called Real War, which was put together by a number of comic strip artists and writers in conjunction with an American conscientious objectors organisation, to actually tell people what warfare is really like, as opposed to the Sylvester Stallone model of just pouring a bottle of Mazola oil over your pectorals and then running into battle with a blazing machine gun. We wanted to tell people what it's like when you're hit by a bullet or when someone next to you is. And we had a wonderful letter from a mother who said that her son had been very, very pro-military with no really clear idea of what that entailed. And after reading Real War, had been in a state of shock for 2 or 3 days and had really been questioning a lot of things and had eventually decided not to do it. That makes me feel good. No, it doesn't solve all the problems in the world straight away and overnight. It would be naive to expect to. But I think that this is the only way that you can make any difference at all, by changing a person's mind here, by altering someone's opinions there. I know that works of art, even as lowly as a pop single, have made some small change in my life in the past. I see no reason to expect that comics should be excluded from that.
As comics attract better writers, many of the artists, both new and established, have leapt at the opportunity to experiment with different techniques.
I think you can look at comic art on 2 levels. You can either look at it as narrative, where it's specifically telling a story, or you can look at it as mood or atmosphere. I personally feel that, as I said earlier, if you're trying to do a complex story, you should keep the visuals fairly simple, and perhaps vice versa. I think you can make very simple things look very exciting by jazzing the visuals on.
Colours are more vivid now. Yeah. And now you get everything bright and all the art's exact. And you get lips and eyebrows and the stuff that you didn't get before.
Want to see this?
I think eventually, and it's taken a long time, people are beginning to realise that comics aren't trash. They've realised that in Europe for many, many years. They've realised it in Japan for many, many years. And I think slowly in this country, people are beginning to realise that it is an accepted and bona fide art form. It never was until very recently.
I think years ago, when comics were a lot more limited, if they wanted to get across a more personalized feeling or even tackle social issues or anything like that, they might eventually be driven to having to do it in another medium. Now, certainly, it's possible for them to do a very personalized statement or even a political statement.
The Light and Darkness War is about the redemption of the Vietnam warrior. In writing such a story, in one way you're trying to project yourself into the actual experience, and to feel the feelings, and to undergo the actual suffering or the actual exaltation that you would experience.
In Light and Darkness War, writer Tom Veitch takes the experience of American soldiers in Vietnam and projects them into a fantasy world of never-ending conflict.
The trouble with doing fantasy, that's just sheer fantasy, is you fall into cliches. Everything is either Conan the Barbarian or Lord of the Rings. And when Tom Veitch first sent me the proposal for Light and Darkness War, the Vietnam War background to the fantasy, I thought, made it something totally different from anything else that had been done in comics to date.
Well, it was just a marriage of ideas between Tom Veitch and myself, and we're both lurking at the back of our minds a story, a kind of time warp story.
Artist Cam Kennedy, like Jim Baikie, lives and works in Orkney. It was during a visit to the United States that he met Tom Veitch.
So we sort of bandied around a few ideas, and I came back to Scotland. We were in America when we were discussing this, and lo and behold, about 5 days after I came home, I got the first synopsis from Tom, which was just the sort of story that I'd always been thinking about, but I could just never write because I'm not really a writer.
Hey! How's your name, man? How you doing? Your hair's looking good.
This is going to look pretty good with that.
Yeah.
is great. And this is great. Oh, man. I don't believe this project would have happened without Cam. For me, seeing his art and seeing what he does with our story is one of the ways I can get in touch with the warrior spirit.
Some people have described my work as being kind of gritty. Others have said it's chunky. So, I mean, take your pick. Well, Mr. Lazarus Jones, this is another fine mess you've got me into.
I had friends who were in Vietnam and people who were hurt badly in Vietnam. And I think I felt a natural guilt because I didn't have to do that. I was at home while they were over there getting killed, you know.
The story in the Light and Darkness War centers on the four-man crew of a helicopter gunship which is blown up during a mission. 3 of the crew are killed and pass into a fantasy universe, while the central character, Laz Jones, returns to America, a crippled and embittered veteran. Later, a road accident allows Jones to rejoin his comrades in their endless mythological war against evil.
It all relates to a very serious thing. Can these people who have been caught in a war that left the United States divided and in a turmoil, and left a lot of the individuals returning from that war in an emotional turmoil, can they work that out through this sort of fantasy experience? And I think underlying Light Darkness War, that's definitely what Tom and Cam are really examining there.
You can really imagine warriors. Well, I'm thinking maybe back to the time of the Vikings and things, but you can actually imagine them coming around the point, the headland there, you know, and finding themselves, you know, just coming into what you'd call a light and darkness situation.
There were warriors on these islands.
Oh, yeah.